Welcome to the B.Accountability podcast series. Today I am very pleased to welcome Ricardo-Cortes Monroy, the Chief Legal Officer and Group General Counsel at Nestlé. Welcome, Ricardo.
Thank you, Helle. It's a pleasure being here at your podcast and happy to have a nice discussion with you.
Thanks. So, Ricardo, you have been working with Nestlé Legal Counsel since 1995, I believe, and prior to Nestlé, you worked as legal counsel in a bank and a mining company, and I believe that you started your career as a litigation specialist in 1986. I also believe that when you started your career, the view on sustainability and the need for businesses to think about emerging issues, including the environmental and social impact of doing business, was not quite as obvious as today. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about the journey that you, as a leader, has witnesses and give advice to other business leaders on how to embrace new thinking and demands from stakeholders. And if I can add on to that question, how is the responsibilities of the General Counsel changing, and why is that?
Well, thank you for the remarks. Actually, it's a number of questions and quite challenging, I have to say. So let me try and walk you through my own journey. I come from a very special country, far away, Chile. And I grew up and studied law, and I started practicing law under a very special regime, the dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet. And I started, like you say, in a law firm, but always serving international companies, particularly mining companies, as Chile is quite strong in mining, particularly in copper. So to some extent, we were a bit a special industry, as mining, by definition, the environmental impact and everything related to it, what we would call today sustainability, has always been inherent. And the Pinochet regime was a very special one in so many fronts, and I'm not touching human rights here, but from an economic and legislative perspective, it was quite an interesting experiment, which saw the country moving from Marxism to, let's call it, University of Chicago, Milton Friedman-driven policies, even before Reagan and Maggie Thatcher. So as a lawyer, that was absolutely fascinating. And there I have to point out that sustainability wasn't seen the way we see it today. And I had the chance to work with a lot of American companies, and I can infer that it was basically the same in the States. It was more of a technical, practical issue. How to get the permits to operate, how to get the permits to build the tailing dams and to start operating in the copper mining. But we weren't thinking the way maybe we should have been thinking in those days, or the way we think today. And it's actually very pleasant to see this positive evolution towards sustainability. And it was fascinating for our generation, I would say, of lawyers to be actors and witnesses of this positive, I would say, global evolution towards a keen accent on sustainability. So, like you say, it's not as obvious as it was today, indeed. Yet one could see the embryo already in the 80s. I joined the law firm in 1986, Felipe de Raza. I think it was the largest law firm in Chile, very connected to top American law firms. And that allowed me to witness the evolution. So indeed, I do agree. It's a positive journey. Not an easy one, not an obvious one probably for our profession, but definitely today the social impact of doing business is at the heart of any general counsel agenda, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a lot of the sustainability departments that I've heard say it, that well, the lawyers are the ones that say no all the time, but suddenly it seems that is changing. Uh, that whole thing that the general counsel seems to becoming the friends of the sustainability departments in that regard. Do you see that the same?
Indeed, I agree with you. And probably before last year, it was a perception, maybe based on anecdotal evidence. But after the, I would say, fantastic work United Nations Global Compact did on a couple of documents, key among them the Guide for General Counsel on Corporate Sustainability, I think the anecdotal evidence became hard data, hard facts. And I think the data supports that view, that the role of the General Counsel today is at the heart of this topic. And like you say, we've evolved quite a bit from, say, the naysayers or the yes or no function to be key leaders, co-leaders in a given company on this matter. To the point that sometimes I wonder where is the limit now between the legal function and public affairs function in a company. And it's so much the case that the amount of colleagues I've seen moving from legal to public affairs is amazing, and I think that it's on the rise. So I think that tells one or two things about the matter.
Yeah, and that's actually I have a question in terms of if we look at the stakeholder demands for transparency and accountability today, and it fits very well with what you just said, it seems that we have this demand for transparency, demand for accountability. We have a high level of connectivity through which information can spread very fast. And that also means that the public expects so much more from a company and that the trust in the company can disappear very quickly. So, and it brings this like, what is the general counsel versus the other departments? But what do you think a company needs to do to build trust and ensure accountability to its stakeholders, both in the short but also in the long run? And again, what role do you see the general counsel or people from general counsel could or should play in that?
Right. That's a massive endeavor, I have to say. I totally agree with the notion that trust is the number one, we could even call it asset a company has. Imagine us, we're the number one consumer goods company in the world by sales, and by far the number one food and beverages company in the world. So imagine for a company like ours, where the corporate name is our number one brand. You see many of our products, they are the brand, the trademark Nestlé. So imagine the trust associated to that, how important it is. How important is the trust for a mother that is using our infant formula to feed her baby? Imagine the level of trust it entails regarding food safety, regarding the nutritional value of that product. So for companies like us, like I would imagine the pharma industry and so many others, trust is the number one asset one has to take care of. Now, trust takes such a long time to build and so very little to lose it, right? So how to build trust? Well, first of all, it's about the products we produce, right? That's essential. In our case, food safety, food quality. And then imagine if that's the notion, the importance of intellectual property, because that trust is represented by what? By a brand, by a trademark. So imagine from a transactional perspective how important it is for a general counsel. But I understand your question going well beyond this. The question goes probably in, as an enterprise, as an undertaking, what is the role? I mean, does the company embody trust or not? And there, of course, you can go well beyond consumer goods industries. So here we enter into the realm of being a good corporate citizen, an entity that not only respects human rights, for instance, but also supports them. And here I think we get into something that is somehow new for a general counsel, which is getting into this dimension, not only ensure compliance in order to respect uh, human rights or the global compact. Let's use some soft law, not only
Mm-hmm.
the global compact, but to support it. And I think when a company really engages in supporting sustainability-related actions, CSV, and the global compact, I think that, I believe, maybe I'm naive, but I believe that that contributes and helps so much to build trust in your own company. We don't do it for that, right? That would be a bit selfish, but that's always a very positive thing. We do it because it's the right thing, and I mean the example a company can provide, especially if it is a leading company, it becomes contagious. And it's fantastic to see when leading multinationals engage in these matters, how many others start following. Not only other companies, but associates. Imagine in our world, law firms. When law firms realized that general counsel were key actors in the development of the notion of sustainability, all of a sudden we started seeing the key law firms joining us, supporting us with concrete action in these endeavors. And I just mentioned these documents by United Nations. Okay, if you look at them, you'll see top law firms like Linklaters, Baker McKenzie, LexisNexis, being not only partners but key stakeholders in developing them. So isn't it fantastic? And I think a general counsel has a key role in making it happen. I mean, we're a bit the catalyzers in the legal world.
You almost make me say that the general counsels will save the world.
I didn't go that far, but it's nice to believe that.
So that's one angle, but clearly your brand and all of that is also what suppliers will be doing, and clearly suppliers have now become more and more important, not only for supplying the materials and the products, etc., but actually also for the brand and talking about sweatshops, talking about other things. And I guess the general counsel also play a huge role in terms of the supply chain.
Indeed. And I think this trend is a good thing, Helle. Of course, as a lawyer, in my case as a litigator, one immediately reacts when there is an issue in the supply chain. One reacts a bit, even aggressively, saying how can this happen, and you start trying to figure out what went wrong, and you argue this is not my responsibility. Yes, it is. And you start the bickering, and even you end up in class action litigations like the U.S. I think ultimately, in front of the consumer, in front of stakeholders, companies, we do have a responsibility in ensuring a clean supply chain. Easier said than done, because when you get into raw materials like shrimps in Thailand, like cocoa in Western Africa, like it seems coffee in Brazil. All of a sudden, when you thought you had everything sorted out, you start finding that some tiers down the supply chain, there are issues. Extremely difficult to monitor, extremely difficult to remedy. But still, we do believe that companies have a big responsibility in terms of mobilizing all necessary stakeholders to resolve these societal issues. And I'm happy to see that in spite of all the noise in the courtroom in the U.S., we're seeing a Thai government starting to address finally the forced labor issue in their supply chain. And that's only positive. So what is the role of a general counsel there? Well, we have to protect our client. We have to partner with the procurement and supply chain function in order to address vigorously these issues in a balanced way, because we are the first one to say we have a huge role in helping these countries to develop their economies. So the easy way is to simply shut shop, right, and leave. For instance, Thailand. The idea, no, is to work with the Thai government in ensuring a compliant fishery industry there, and helping, the local economy while ensuring, utmost respect of human rights. It's a long-term vision, but the role of a legal function and of a GC in any company is today it's crucial. Hmm?
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, I totally agree. But also that it's not an easy task. Um, and I wanted to go, and I know we could talk a lot of time just on that, but I wanted to go back to what you said before in terms of uh, different stakeholders, and I think you said, the mother, that in
Hmm.
terms of the products, and I know that we are talking a lot about materiality,
Yes.
and that what is material for one stakeholder, the mother, might not be material for another. Um, but at the same time, we're talking about the leadership, including the board of directors, being responsible for both the communication and the actions of the company, both in terms of the company, but more and more also legally in terms of what's going on in the supply chain. So, to ensure transparency, would you say that a company should define who their main stakeholders or audience are in their external report and then focus on the issues that are most material to those stakeholders? Or do you believe that a company should be accountable and report on everything, which they are expected to report on from all different stakeholder groups?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I would like to answer like a lawyer. It depends. But yeah, certainly I would start with the first premise, the first alternative. I think, from a practical perspective, so you can immediately set up your teams and set clear goals and put the resources behind it. Uh, I think a company should define who the main stakeholders are and the audience, right? In our
Yeah.
external reporting. Having said that, it shouldn't be rigid because, like the second part of your question insinuates or entails, I think this is a moving target, and the way I see it, the last 5 years since I'm a group general counsel, I see every year more and more relevant stakeholders, and they have all the right in the world to come here and ask. So the, mo- the more the merrier, like the English say.
Yeah.
Now, do we need to answer to every stakeholder? Probably the answer is not. At Nestle, we like to answer to every stakeholder that engages in a constructive dialogue. There are some people that simply want, for instance, our company out of business in bottled water or infant formula. It's very hard to engage in a dialogue with those stakeholders. As much as I respect their position, we don't agree. However, if somebody challenges us on, for instance, bottled water and the sustainability of that business, and they want to work with us, fantastic. Huh? And having said that, then some of our stakeholders are really challenging ones, and that we respect immensely, and that we disagree on many, many, many occasions, but we work constructively. And I'm thinking about Oxfam, I'm thinking about Greenpeace, and frankly, we welcome their views because they help us to improve. Mm?
Yeah, it helps often on innovation. If
Exactly.
you're being asked disruptive questions, you often think differently. Um,
Exactly. So you see, my answer is a bit, it depends. So yeah, we
or
start by defining, but we're totally open to adapt that list every single year. And the way I see it is longer and longer the list. Good. It
I
means that
I
people are interested in what we do. Mm?
I hear you. And another party that seems to be more and more interested is the regulators. So
Yeah.
we see more and more regulation related to sustainability issues and more requests also for more regulations from the groups that you talked about before, and all kind of stakeholders and interest groups. And I guess that this puts an increased pressure on both the business leaders and the general counsel to both understand all of these new demands and also have the knowledge and the people that have in-depth knowledge of the sustainability issues, both at your team, at the general counsel, as well as the executive team and also on the board of director level. So what would your advice to companies be in that respect? How should a company ensure that they are well prepared, knowing what kind of regulations coming up, and perhaps even be ahead of the regulation?
Indeed. Well, first of all, I agree certainly with your assessment that more and more regulation related to sustainability is being enacted or discussed or enforced, or all of the three together. Definitely. And every single survey I see from the CLO associations or companies like KPMG or Price and Waterhouse, all of them rate as the number one quote unquote risk for companies regulation. Hmm? I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I believe in good or bad regulation. And frankly, I prefer a regulated environment than a cloud of uncertainty which ends up in a massive amount of litigation. I'm not thinking about, for instance, class actions related to organic or natural in the US, where none of those concepts is defined, and they're perfectly defined in Europe, and we have no litigation. So you see, litigation can be good. So there, I'm fine. Like you say, I think it puts increased pressure on business leaders and of course, general counsel to understand this. And definitely, that's when all of a sudden one wakes up one day and you realize that maybe you're missing the people with in-depth knowledge, and you need to start preparing your teams. And the way I would suggest to start addressing this kind of things is get the right people, and that could be hiring the necessary experts or partnering with the top external advisors. So there are many new ventures providing so much help in this front. And the way we did it here, when it became so obvious that regulation needed to be addressed differently at Nestlé, we created a year and a half ago what we call the Global Advocacy Committee, which is basically a committee. It's a small one, only 4-person, but the group heads of public affairs, legal, regulatory, and a unit we call Be Well, which is the wellness. It's the one in charge of everything related to consumer communication, food labeling, and these kind of things. And we brought to the attention of the board of directors the need for us to take ownership on 7 topics, all of them related to sustainability, and we report to the board on a very regular basis on specific topics, substantive discussions, and once a year we do a State of the Union with the board and get their strategic direction. So you see, it's a combination of regular discussions at the board, because these issues are affecting our operations, but then it's good to have people entirely dedicated to this, to take a strategic look at it and report on a very regular basis. And that certainly, at least at Nestlé, the role of the General Counsel is key, as we are member there. Not only that, but one of my direct reports, one of my vice presidents in legal, is the secretary to that committee. And you know, we say in Chile, the power of the minutes. Basically, this colleague of mine is driving the agenda, and he keeps the drumming beat to keep traction. But I can't imagine today, Nestle operating with that committee, because behind the committee, we have literally a couple thousand of professionals in our functions, now dedicated with very clear KPIs and goals and targets to address all these sustainability-related issues.
So I actually had a question for you about what were your biggest concerns as general counsel and how you mitigate them. But it sounds to me that you're turning your biggest concerns or risk into opportunities.
Definitely. I am a firm believer in that Chinese character. I don't read Chinese, but I've been told that in Mandarin, the pictogram used for crisis and for opportunity is exactly the same one. And I totally
Mm-hmm.
believe in that. So what started as a crisis in end of 2012, I mean, for us that was a critical year when we realized that we had to do a better job in sustainability generally, particularly on food law, let's call it that way. That's when
Mm-hmm.
we created this new approach. And for the legal function, I presented the legal strategy for the board that year, where our number one priority became that one. And we decided to call it Food Industry Legal Challenges. But basically, it's for legal sustainability became the number one priority. So not only a key issue, the number one priority. Hmm?
So that, Ricardo, I'm wondering if that is almost your special recipe for your special leadership style that ensures that sustainable long-term decisions are made and without sacrificing the short-term results and um, yeah. So I'm thinking is that the recipe for this leadership style that both ensure the long and short term and also almost the fiduciary duty of the board to find that balance?
Indeed, indeed. No, we, although I hate cliches, sometimes they're very useful to communicate strategic ideas. The one cliche we have in Nestle Legal is our mindset is to answer two questions whenever we're confronted with a problem. Is it legal and is it right? And
Hmm.
frankly, when you start thinking about it, the is it right is so fundamental. So all of this sustainability dimension, I think that's the right approach. It's about is it right? Is it the right thing to do? Is it the right thing to be in this or that business? Is it the right thing, to build this factory or not? And then environmental dimension, for instance, becomes so crucial. That's a bit the approach. Now, how did it happen? I would lie to you if I told you that one day we sat down with my leadership team to say, okay, how do we take care of these matters? It became naturally, Helle. It was a journey, an accelerated journey that I would say took place between 2011 and 2012. As of 2013, it became at the heart of the legal strategy of this company.
Wow. Yeah.
Hmm.
Impressive. Impressive. So, Ricardo, I'm just looking at the clock. We better start going to the last question here.
Yes.
And uh, so, any advice that you want to give to colleagues, other general counsels, about the current but also the future role, including on how to assist board of directors and, I guess, advice to business leaders in general?
Yeah. My advice, I mean, based on the experience we've seen here and in other peer companies, and particularly the ones taking the lead in these matters. I'm thinking about, for instance, our main competitor, but a great company in this front, Unilever. I think a general counsel has to embrace this. Now, I'm not saying exclusively. I believe in partnership. So whatever a company calls public affairs, corporate affairs, governmental affairs, regulatory, I would suggest that we as GCs partner with them. Now, a tip. It's very easy to forget that we're general counsel and all of a sudden we become public affairs manager. I think that will be a disservice to our companies. I believe that the GC should remain being a GC. Now, if a lawyer wants to cross the bridge and become a public affairs professional, I'm fine with that. What I think doesn't work is when all of a sudden the GC becomes a hybrid. That's a big caveat because I've seen people making that mistake. I think the law dimension is big, it's huge, and keeps growing in this sense. Our job towards our company is to connect sustainability with law. So I sound a bit academic, I know, but trust me that I've seen GCs that become, I don't know, a bit of a hybrid and an ambassador that is not very clear what they're doing. My
So it
my
sounds
advice: take the lead, partner with other functions, and represent the legal dimension in the board. Mhm.
yeah, and it sounds to me like focus, but have integrated thinking in mind.
Exactly, exactly.
Ricardo, we could continue here, and there's so many more questions that I want to ask you and hear more, and I'm quite sure everybody who will listen to us wants to know more as well. But for now, I will say thank you so much for all this insight. It's truly both interesting and impressive, and I'm quite sure that we are going to see much more of General Counsel. Joining and I will not say save the world, but helping save the world in that regard. So Ricardo, thank you very very much for your time today.
Helle, a pleasure actually to partner with you and your colleagues on these endeavors. So thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you. Talk to you. Take care.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.